To demonstrate this fact, put a cobalt or steel needle in the position given to the cobalt particle. You will see that both ends are different and are not interchangeable unless repolarized in reverse. You might better comprehend this if you lower two needles toward the center of the coil. You will find one reaching out for the north and the other reaching for the south. Now try again with a steel or cobalt rod as long as the field. By placing it in the conical coil shown in Figure 70, you will now see that not only are both ends different, but also the middle is different. Both ends are polarized gravity centers for high electric potential, and the middle gives no evidence of gravity, for the electrical potential is zero in the middle. In an unbalanced metal like cobalt, the middle is a little off-center. The reason for that is that the middle is the cathode dividing point, and the ends are anodes, which unite as one. In other words, the reason both ends are different is because one end is red or male end, and the other is blue or female end. Cobalt is preponderantly blue or female. The red end of the spectrum is weak in it. Under such conditions of unbalance, the polarization process could not possibly eject equal potentials. To better understand this, take the cobalt out entirely. Only the zero of equilibrium is now there. Now turn on the current and you immediately divide that equilibrium, balanced zero, into four opposite and equal pairs, all of which units are in perfect balance with their mates. The cathode is also in the exact middle instead of being off-center. That is the way nature creates atoms. Cobalt is an unbalanced unit of a pair. It cannot be divided into equal pairs when used as a cathode. If we now put a piece of the metal cobalt between two coils, like Figure 70, the middle will become the plane of highest potential, and its center will attract a needle if held toward any point of its circumference. If cobalt is thus placed in the anode position instead of the cathode, there will be no ejections of electrons and neutrinos from its polar ends. Instead of that, there will be ring ejections from the equatorial plane of maximum high potential, maximum heat, and maximum density. We now have the decay process instead of the polarization process. Step number 5. One should now be able to fully comprehend that if one attempts to divide an unbalanced element like cobalt by polarizing it, one will obtain an unbalanced result. Carbon, for example, is a balanced dual element. It is true cube and is white. White cobalt is distorted cube and is blue. The same experiments tried with carbon or sodium chloride or potassium bromide would give balanced results. The ejections from both ends would be the same. If, on the contrary, sodium iodide or potassium chloride is used, the results would be as unbalanced as these latter pairs are unbalanced. Each of these pairs crystallize in distorted cubes, while the evenly mated pairs crystallize in true cubes, like carbon. The familiar bar magnet created by the electric current will serve as a clarifying example of balance in the elements, which are all created in pairs, but are as often united as unbalanced pairs as balanced ones. Step number 6. In further statements made in Life, Science Newsletter, and many other newspapers, it is claimed that the discovery of different ends of atomic particles and emissions of other particles from opposite ends gives to each emitted particle a spin in the direction of its motion. As the motion of these ejected particles is claimed to be in opposite directions, the result of the discovery has proved that motion is two-way, which means right-handed and left-handed. To explain to you how utterly impossible it is for this to take place in nature, and again to show how easily the senses can be persuaded to believe as facts the very opposite of what is factual, we have to go back to the utter simplicity of the fundamentals of our universe and lead up to a comprehension of such as impossibility. We do this as simply and briefly as possible. In other words, we will return to the electric current and compare this experiment to just one cycle of it. We therefore first postulate the basic fact that in all this universe there is only one direction to motion, but that one direction produces two opposite series of effects. Rain falls to the ground and rises as vapor. That seems to be two directions. A cyclone is anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. Right-handedness and left-handedness, up and down, in and out, hot and cold, life and death, expansion and contraction, and 100 other opposite pairs of effects are produced by one direction of motion in this pulsing universe. If we had to clarify this ideal for a teenage boy, we would tell him to take a pencil and a large piece of paper, then begin drawing a closing spiral clockwise, starting slowly from way out into space, and increasing his speed constantly as he turns around a hole in the center. We would tell him to keep his drawing in the same direction around that hole, but go outward spirally, and decrease his speed continually until he got way out into blank space again. We would tell him to keep on repeating that operation over and over again without changing direction. Let us now look at this drawing. Two effects have been produced in this opening and closing universe of a compression, expansion, life-death, and inbreathing, outbreathing sequences. Density has been created in the direction of the center, and potential has lowered in the direction of the circumferences. So also has heat and speed and high potential been created at the center and their opposites out in space. Figure 71 is a demonstration of this fact as drawn by a child for simple understanding. And here's a drawing such as he was speaking of there. Figure 72 demonstrates this one direction for a two-effect principle in small-scale matter. Figure 73 and 74 demonstrate the same principle in large-scale matter. Nature does not have one law for atomic scale and another for stellar scale. She has only one way of constructing matter, and that is fully covered in the electric current and the octave wave. All direction is curved, all motion is spiral. The law generating matter seeks higher pressure zones. The law radiating matter seeks lower pressure zones. This drawing exemplifies the electric effect of two seemingly opposite directions and opposite pressures from one direction of motion, as demonstrated in Figure 71. Step 7. There is no right-handedness nor left-handedness in nature, but its every effect causes the illusion of right-handedness and left-handedness. That illusion belongs to the senses, therefore, and not to nature. Our senses have become so fixedly accustomed to dual direction that it is difficult to explain it away, for the human understanding of omnipresent oneness has not sufficiently unfolded as yet to make it easily comprehensible. We will endeavor to do so, however, by the use of child primer simplicity. As a first step, we again remind you that nature creates everything in pairs, and that all pairs unite to form masses. The hemispheres of a sun are united pairs, for example. Try, therefore, as a first mental exercise, to image the uniting of two hemispheres of the sun, which are spinning in opposite directions. The fact that you yourself are right-handed and left-handed adds to the difficulty of the subtle thing which we must explain about our universe, which has led these observers to form such conclusions. What we mean by this is that nature is bilateral. Everything which is created is equally extended in pairs from a cathode dividing equator. The equator acts as though it were a mirror. It reflects each extended unit of each pair in reverse. These divided pairs unite as two hemispheres of a sphere, which is also divided by an equator. This same principle, as demonstrated in Figure 71 and 72, is also demonstrated by the atomic and nuclear systems, which form where two anoids are united by collision. This figure demonstrates the one way of motion which produces both effects of life and death in nature. A familiar spiral nebula in the heavens, seen in the direction of its poles instead of the direction of its equator, as in Figure 67. It has always been believed that two directions of motion have been responsible for this effect. As a second mental exercise, consider your own body in this light. The equator of your body is a plane extending through it between your eyes, which divides your body into right-hand and left-hand units of pairs. During the millions of years of your unfolding, your senses have translated unitary facts as dual ejects. Let us demonstrate this ideal. Imagine that you can reach out with your right hand and grasp the right hand end of the Earth pole of rotation. With your left hand you reach out and grasp the left end of that pole. If you stand there as rigidly as still, the equator of the planet and the equator of your body are in the same plane. This being true, one of your eyes is on the right side of the equator, and the other is on the left. In this position, both of your eyes see only the one effect of the planet spinning in the same direction. Now bend your body so that both of your eyes can see what the right side of the planet is doing. You now see a clockwise direction to the spinning of the planet. Now bend your body so that both of your eyes can see what the left side is doing. You now see anti-clockwise spinning. In other words, you see opposite directions of motion where there is but one direction. We will again demonstrate this by having you hold a pencil in each hand in such a manner that both touch the spinning planet at points to the right and to the left of its equator. As the Earth spins, you move both pencils slowly toward the stillness of the pole of rotation. If it were now possible to remove these two pencilings from the planet and lay them flat before you, you would again see them as oppositely directioned right hand and left hand, clockwise and anti-clockwise spirals, as shown in Figure 66. Your senses have told you that because your senses and your body are dual. Mind knowing is not divided, however, so if you unite that divided pair of drawings, you can no longer sense two directions. Try it. Paste the two pencil diagrams together. Hold them to the light and you will see that both opposite directions are one. If you fold Figure 66 at the horizontal line, you would find that both opposite spirals follow the same direction. This is exactly what the Li-Yang experimenters have done. Their coil of motion, which caused the division, turns but one way, just as a sphere which you have held between your hands turns but one way. The particles have been ejected from that coil in an angle of 90 degrees from their plane of motion. Yet it is now held that these particles turn right-handed from one end to turn in the direction of its motion, and particles ejected from the other end turn left-handed for the same reason. This creates the utterly impossible condition of giving matter two shafts of gravity which are at right angles with each other. Nowhere in nature is there a precedent for projected masses spinning in the direction of their motion. A bullet from a rifle spins around its axis of direction. Rifle barrels are spirally grooved to attenuate this spin. Even if bullets are spherical, like cannonballs, they would still spin around their axis of direction, for their equators must necessarily be at an angle of 90 degrees from their gravity shafts, and no mass in nature spins in any other direction than that of its equator. Figure 75. A right hand and left hand spin in the direction of the oppositely projected particles would require two extra shafts of gravity at 90-degree angles for the gravity shaft of polarity. This is a violation of nature's gyroscopic principle. It is a commonly known fact by every physicist and laboratory worker that electricity runs only in the direction of the turnings in a solenoid coil. Every such worker is also perfectly familiar with the effect of polarization, which evidences its effects at 90 degrees from the direction and plane of the electric current. These two seeming directions and effects are confusing to him, for the idea of polarization as an extension of stillness has not yet entered his thinking. It is new thinking, but it must someday be realized that a three-dimensional universe is only an illusion caused by polarization, and that there is no motion whatsoever in the direction of gravity shafts which contribute to the three-dimensional illusion. This leads us to the final step, step number 8. Is the last of the wrongly assumed premises which we must explain away. This last premise states, in essence, that as matter spins in the direction of its motion, and as there are two opposite directions of motion in which particles are projected from opposite cobalt ends, it is henceforth to be a law that particles will now be referred to as right-handed or left-handed, contrary to what the principle of parity held. And that's from Life. This is again difficult to explain in this early stage of mind unfolding. To attempt to explain it requires combating what our senses sense and what our mind knows. Again, we will attempt it by child primer simplicity. The fallacy of this entire statement lies in the belief that the two opposite directions, which the projected particles are following, are directions of motion. Herein lies the cause of the misconception, which pure illusion of motion is accountable for. These two opposite directions in which the cobalt particles have been projected are not the direction of motion. They are points or shafts within the stillness of the zero universe, which have become identifiable by motion. The one direction of motion is that of rings which encircle that projected direction within stillness in planes of 90 degrees from it. The human mind has not quite progressed to that point where it can separate illusion from its cause, and our difficulty in clarifying the illusion is due to the eons in which we have seen, boats, planes, clouds, people, and countless other expressions of energy move from place to place within the omnipresence of gravity to simulate that energy, which they are but expressing. Our senses have accustomed us to believe that the direction of motion is the direction in which we see an object change its position. Our knowing mind, however, attributes that seeming change of position to gravity division of omnipresent oneness, and attributes its cause to the direction of motion, which spins around this direction at an angle of 90 degrees from it. To clarify this new thinking, we shall go back to the electric wave, within which all of the secrets of creation are hidden. Bear in mind that the electric wave is the divider of one into 4 pairs, which constitute one. As we explain this thought, turn back to figures 17 to 29 to give objectivity to them. Now vision the universe as all cathoid, which means all zero, as visualized in figure 6. All motion begins at a cathoid point in space, which is all cathoid. It cannot move out of that omnipresent position, however, without dividing its seeming energy into 4 radar-acting pairs of the wave, which is beginning to construct, but nor can it do so without measuring out its own desire energy into countless billions of other cathoids throughout all omnipresence. At this point, turn back to the 2 cyclone drawings, figure 51, 52. You will see there a 0, which centers the cathoid of that hurricane, which we call the eye. There is no object there, such as a mouse, a man, or 1,000-ton boat, or a crystal of cobalt, but there could be. It would make no difference as long as they are still and have not expressed a desire to move the whole universe, which must automatically move when they move. Electricity divides stillness. Motion then begins, but not until. It seems platitudinous for us to say that when we start a boat from that point, or a bullet, that neither of them are moving in the direction that our senses tell us they are moving. And it seems quite ridiculous to go beyond that and say that neither of them are moving at all in any direction. Yet it is necessary to utterly change our knowing from what our senses tell us in this respect, if we desire to comprehend the illusions of our 3-dimensional mirrored universe and its very deceptive ways. When our senses tell us that a speeding bullet is not a direction of motion, it is difficult to think of it as stillness, which is centering fast-moving motion. It might help to remold your concept by imagining a motionless floating cloud, which changes its position because of a wind. The direction of motion is not in the cloud. It is in the spiraling of the wind. The cloud is still in the same position in relation to gravity, even though its position has been changed by motion, which is outside of itself, for it is still floating at rest. Even the slightest change in its position of stillness causes a spiral motion to encircle it and spin around it at an angle of 90 degrees from its gravity shaft, which extends from the earth. It may be quite an effort to comprehend that stillness cannot change, but can seem to. When you fully grasp this fact, however, much that is complex will become simple. If these sincere young physicists had that mind awareness, they would not have reasoned as they did in relation to an experiment which they have mistaken to be something other than the simple, basic polarization process of nature, which extends the 2-dimensional thought ring universe into a 3-dimensional dual action universe. nor would they have come to the conclusion stated by them had they observed the majestic example in the heavens of all the planets, suns, spiral nebula, and galaxies, which, without exception, turn in planes which parallel their equators, and always at 90-degree angles from their polar shafts. Every planet and sun in the heavens spins in the same direction that a speeding bullet spins. That direction is 90 degrees from the direction of the speeding bullet, which is always the eye of the cyclone its motion is producing. Their particles are similar to speeding bullets, or equators of planets and suns which always spin in spiral rings around their gravity shafts, and never in the direction shown in their explanatory drawings. To aid in making such new thinking clear, we will endeavor to express our thoughts by using the language of diagrams and familiar examples, which we will confine within one cycle of the electric current in principle. In thus confining our description of this new thinking within the demonstrable effects within one cycle of the electric current, we sincerely hope that future thinking and reasoning will have a better basis upon which to form conclusions which are not affected by the illusions of motion that have for so long and so disastrously affected human reasoning. There is, in this universe, an underlying principle which has always eluded mankind. If we try to put this principle into words, they would read as follows. Every effect of motion is voided as it occurs, is repeated as it is voided, and is recorded as it is repeated. Our senses deceive us in this respect. They see the pendulum swing one way, but the mind knows that an equal force simultaneously swings the invisible one the other way. That which is divided on one side of the cathode is equally divided on the other side. Likewise, that which is multiplied as it approaches the anode on the red side multiplies equally on the other side. Even time has its backward flow to make time stand still on its zero mark. The pendulum well illustrates this duality in nature, which makes so many things seem to be other than what they are, and to be moving when their moving is voided by an opposite moving. Nature is continually moving to the senses, but within mind knowing, it stands perfectly still, as but a thought picture or of ideal. You can readily see why it is difficult to find adequate words to explain a so seemingly universal paradox, and why we must use another language than words. This we shall do step by step very briefly, but sufficient to explain why both ends of the cobalt atom in the experiment emit different sized particles around a center.